Hello and thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this wonderful conference. And thank you for all the presenters for your really impressive work and sharing it with us. So as you know, I was supposed to be here with Liron, Lavi, Turkenich. Unfortunately, all flights from Israel are canceled. So I'll do my best to speak on behalf of her and share our ongoing research. And she is with us on Zoom, so afterwards, if there's any questions, she'll be happy to jump in the conversation. We'll briefly describe the Hebrew script shift from written to printed form across time. Following that, we'll share our research on the impact of printing technologies on Hebrew type and outline how technological advancement carried over flaws and created technological conventions that are not inherent to the Hebrew script. The modern Hebrew developed around 560 BCE, and the Hebrew script supports many Jewish languages developed by Jewish communities that have been dispersed around the world since the first century. It is a single-case alphabetic script written from right to left, consisting of 22 letters and 5 additional final letters that appear only at the end of the words. Its distinguishing features are its square-like forms, with only one ascending stroke and very few descending strokes. Hebrew was the vernacular language of the Israelites and the Judean people for over 1300 years, when around 200 BCE it died as a spoken language and was restricted to religious practice. For the following centuries, Hebrew froze as a sacred script and language and was limited to being read and copied. Scribes that were authorized to copy religious texts had to adhere to strict rules and maintain the forms of the letters, even at the cost of poor readability. The forms were fixed and did not undergo the natural evolution that a secular script would. The invention of printing was welcomed by Jewish communities that were scattered in Europe amongst other nations. As religious manuscripts played a central role in their lives, printing them instead of copying them by hand increased their production and distribution. But the shift from the written form to movable type was very problematic for several reasons, mainly due to the nature of Hebrew writing. That was one of self-production versus commercial production, and that meant that there were no clear and unified writing models that would serve as references. In addition, printing conditions were mostly poor and dependent on the authorities' attitudes and tolerance towards Jewish communities. The late 18th century marked a growing demand for printed material in Jewish languages. The Jewish Enlightenment movement called to familiarize Jews with the revived Hebrew language, as well as secular education and culture. A wide range of texts were now being printed, such as literature, commentary, and many newspapers and periodicals. The existing typefaces, however, failed to support this increasing demand. At the same time, design and production of new typefaces was not a lucrative venture for existing foundries, which controlled the market. So for today's presentation, we selected 3 case studies that illustrate how economic circumstances and technological constraints played a crucial part in determining what was and what was not available for Hebrew typography, and how that situation shaped Hebrew type throughout the years. Let's talk about ascenders and descenders, and review again this one character with the ascending stroke called Lamed. When examining historic wood type, the struggles are evident. This is a mirrored image of the type, and please note that the images in this representations are mirrored so we can examine the letter forms in the right reading way. So these are full Lamed. They're carved in their entirety onto the wood block. But these have missing ascenders. These were carved on smaller bodies so the ascenders overhang to allow faster typesetting of leading. And they would often crack and break under the pressure of the press. The result was these deformed printed impressions of the lamed with a very short ascender or no ascender at all. We can see here this Yiddish broadside that was printed in Brooklyn in the 50s, and these are all broken ascenders. There was a design solution for this problem, a backwards bended stroke. And here are some variations of this bended ascender. In some cases, two alternate characters of shorter lameds were produced. And this short ascender had the advantage of allowing tighter line spacing, saving space to fit more lines on a page. But both adaptations are far removed from the original way the lamed is written. And it's really hard for us to imagine that they had been designed by a native reader or speaker or writer. So this is from a 1951 book called the book Hebrew Artistic Lettering, written by Toby. And he writes, the said results of forceful adaptation are being met with continuously on signboards, advertisement, letterheads, and similar matter. They exhibit upstrokes curved downwards and chopped off, and other freakish mutilations. Over time, this short ascender became the default. We see the design tendency, especially in monolinear styles and in multi-script typefaces. The main reason, again, is to stay within the Latin cap height and not to expand the leading. So it's really only when the Hebrew is matched with a taller cap height Latin that the lamed can ascend according to its traditional proportions. A similar phenomenon can be seen in the letter Ayin that has a descending stroke. Again, in wood type, when not carved in its entirety on the block, the descender would tend to break. And here we can see one full Ayin next to two broken ones. And it is interesting to see that the middle one was actually filed after the fact, after it was broken, to follow the lines of the block. Here are some more examples of ascenders that were altered by the printer post-production. So these were sawed in straight lines after they would crack and break. And what is unfortunate to see is that the shape of the broken descender was being perceived as the correct original letter form. This is from a linotype specimen from 1939. When we compare it with the original letter, Ayin, and its doctus, we can see how the shape of the bottom end stroke is mimicking the shape of the rectangular wood block. This crude alteration makes absolutely no sense. However, it was very useful in the cases where a vowel mark would have to be added below the letter. And it seems that more fitting solutions were developed for allowing this space for the vowel mark in the form of alternate characters. So we can see two options for the Ayin, one with the bottom stroke that is drawn on the baseline. Today, the design fault is to have no ascender at all, and mostly no alternate characters. And we can segue to the vowel marks themselves, which are not being used. The Hebrew language uses the abjad writing system, in which only consonants are represented, leaving vowel sounds to be deciphered by the reader. As the Hebrew language became more widely written in the diaspora, various vocalization systems developed gradually in order to preserve the traditional pronunciation of the Bible. The pointing system called Nikud, that developed in Tiberias around the 10th century, was considered the most comprehensive and became the dominant vocalization system. It consists of points and marks positioned either within the counters, above, or below the letter forms. And this system is far from ideal. Over the years, many graphic reforms were proposed to replace the pointed script altogether. The goal was to achieve a single continuous line of script with equal representation for both consonants and vowels. none of the proposals were ever accepted. Today's default is the unpointed script. No vowel marks are used except in specific cases, such as language books, children's literature, religious texts, poetry, or single ambiguous words. In daily practice, Hebrew readers infer non-vocalized words from their prior knowledge of the language and the context of the sentence. For example, this is an online newspaper, and as you can see, it is unpointed. In this headline, this particular word, without the nikud, can be read in 4 different ways. Each have a very different meaning. Historically, none of the printing technologies could support the nikud in an adequate way. It was tedious and expensive. In hand-setting individual sorts, the marks that are below the characters are set in separate lines under the characters, and setting these small vowel points was just not sustainable. The specific nikud points, dagesh or mapik and cholam chaser, are positioned inside and above the characters. And some fonts were expanded to include additional sorts that had points cut in as an integral part of the character. As you can see here, an example for wood type, these were more expensive to produce and therefore probably not always accessible. And we find evidence that printers would often modify the unpointed characters to have a modular solution with either random nails hammered into the counters, yes, or drilled holes and dowels. These are Yiddish broadsides printed in Brooklyn around the 1930s, and as you can see, uses unpointed characters. Now, this is a problem because in the Yiddish language does include vowels. The vocalization marks appear below the letters are in fact an integral part of the letter form. So when these marks are carved onto the body, they were easily printed. And yet often Yiddish printed matter is lacking these characters. We suspect that if and when the nikud sorts were available, the option of individually setting them in a separate line was not realistic. The solution of mechanical composing was highly impractical. Both monotype and linotype provided automated casting systems that had one line of letters typed, followed by a line of their respective nikud marks below. Since monotype cast individual sorts, the method had some benefits over linotype. Pointed Hebrew was developed by the American Monotype Company and introduced to the market in 1927. In order to afford the increased production cost of pointed characters, usually only 2 width units were assigned to the vowel marks. That meant that each and every Hebrew character had to be redrawn by the drawing office to fit either 9 or 18 units, causing dramatic changes to the proportions. Studying correspondence on production of Hebrew faces at Monotype reveals both how desperate clients were for new types and how low they were prioritized. As Monotype dominated casting options, the final decision on design and production were made according to what they were willing and able to accommodate. That meant that designers were hardly involved in the process, and the actual needs of the readers were not fully considered. The hot metal era defined the character set to include these additional sorts that had the points cut within them. That character set served as reference when transitioning to the following technologies. Which brings us to today's nonsensical character set. Marked in orange are the composite characters in glyphs, which include the points called dagesh and mapik. They are technological remains of the past. They are not needed today, and they only inflate the numbers of characters. Technically, they can be created automatically with anchors. They remain in the software for supporting older encoding. They are representation forms. So let's talk about the character set. The pointed Hebrew had to be adapted to fit the existing Latin matrix case. Much effort was put into finding the right arrangement according to unit widths and character frequencies. In order for all the pointed combinations to be cast, the traditional character set had to be downsized. The infrequent forms were omitted and subsequently disappeared from printed matter. One example of what was omitted is a group of alternate characters called wide letters. These letters developed as calligraphic solution that biblical scribes have developed for block alignment. So here we see the Lamed again, the top one in its original proportions, and the lower one is wider. And there are other letters that can get the same treatment. These alternates made their way in some early printing types, but they did not survive technological advancements. And so they disappeared and were not really giving a typographic chance. Even if typesetters were aware of the historic existence and wished to use them, they were simply not available for them. And it is really interesting to see when these wide letters were reintroduced, they tended to resurface. These are examples of logo designs that employ those wide letters. And most recently, with variable fonts, they can now also be easily typeset and customized. So to conclude, the market for Hebrew type is and always will be a very small one. However, the fact that now there are no technological limitations and new tools that are introducing so many new options makes this the ideal time to enrich Hebrew type and typography. Let's question the defaults. Let's understand how they came to be. Designers and readers can now reflect on the available options and should incorporate new needed ones. Users need to define and create the tools that support their own script and language. We are no longer at the mercy of external forces. Once authentic, informed design options are available, we can see how they're being used in the local typographic landscape and inspect how they might shape the future of Hebrew type. Thank you.